Hello and welcome to Weather or Not. The focus this week remains over the western United States as wildfires begin to threaten residential populations in Idaho. The Beaver Creek Fire is threatening large populations, including a renowned celebrity town in central Idaho. In Nature in the News this week, we'll talk about the response of the hotspot crews to this large fire, but also about meteorological worries that will follow when the fires are extinguished. We'll flesh out the fire's effect on communities and climate change, and also about some new growth in a national forest. This week's show is packed, so stay tuned as we dive into Weather or Not. Hello and welcome to Weather or Not. I'm your host, Tom Bedard. Travis Patterson is this week's forecaster, and he'll join us later in the show. Now, nothing could beat last weekend's warm, dry, and sunny weather. We enjoyed a nice period of high pressure that allowed us to evade the dog days of summer for the time being. Though, as often happens in weather, patterns that provide beautiful weather for one part of the United States allow for dangerous conditions in another. The northwestern United States are still in the grips of a spell of hot, dry weather that's allowing fires to amplify. Let's get down to the details in this week's Nature in the News. The town of Ketchum, Idaho is feeling the effects of a fiery summer. Forced evacuations, lost tourist income, and the threat of residents losing their property are heavy on the shoulders of the threatened town. It would seem that once crews are able to control and extinguish the fire, the weight begins to diminish. Residents return to homes, some damaged, some not. Tourists will eventually trickle back into the region, and the worry of evacuations will be but a constant memory. The human population may be resilient, but the torched landscape is not. One of last week's Nature in the News stories told of a fatality resulting from a flash flood in Manitou Springs, Colorado. The soil in the area of Manitou Springs, which was deeply scorched by a wildfire, was unable to capture and absorb nearly any moisture from heavy rainfall. This is not an uncommon story. Regions affected by these massive summer blazes are often plagued by mudslides and flash floods for up to 10 years after the blaze is extinguished. The story turns from a response to a drawn-out recovery where the town's infrastructure must be able to cope with the new threat. Wildfires cause regions to be predisposed to mudslides and flash floods for up to 10 years, but meteorologists have their sights set on decades into the future. The blazes not only affect the soils that they churn over, but also the atmosphere that they are releasing particles into. A group of meteorologists are interested in researching the effects of the particles and aerosols that these massive fires release. They are mainly concerned with how these releases affect climate change. Early assertions from the Brookhaven National Laboratory state that, quote, the thick black smoke emitted from a wildfire is burning tends to have a warning effect on the climate, unquote. Black smoke is a result of organic particles that have been exposed to extremely high temperatures and subsequently carbonized. As these particles are blown away from the fire, they often gain a white or silvery organic coating that cools its surrounding environment. The research is still in the stage of data collection, so no solid products can be drawn from it until the researchers have had enough time for analysis. A sedentary look at the global climate shift takes our gaze south of Idaho to the thick forests of Northern California. The deeply wooded, cool, and wet region of the West Coast is known best by its population of coastal redwood and sequoia trees. To refresh your memory, the Redwood National Park in Northern California houses 45% of the remaining redwood tree population. These large standing old-growth trees can tower over 370 feet in the air and are still growing. Their growth rate has been the interest of a multi-million-dollar four-year study called the Redwoods Climate Change Initiative. This project leads researchers up and down the trees while they took bark and core samples to analyze their growth. After collecting and analyzing their data, the researchers found that the trees are undergoing major growth spurts. The source of the spurts is still under investigation, but is believed to be a result of a warming climate or lessened air pollution. No matter the reason, it's a nice change of pace, rather, to hear about a growing forest in the midst of what has been a devastating fire season. Amidst the talk of forest growth is more positive agricultural news from Great Britain. A combination of a recent hot summer, cold spring, and wet 2012 autumn have allowed for a ripe and healthy crop of apples to hit the stands early this year. The climatological setup was perfect to allow for picturesque crop growth. Last year's very wet fall allowed the soil to absorb a large amount of moisture. The following cold spring and winter kept the apple trees from blooming, until the weather would cooperate. That is to say that the hot weather following the cold spring did not allow for a deadly freeze that would have killed apple blossoms. Now let's bring the conversation back to the States and ask Travis about what we have in store for this weekend's weather.
Well, relief is coming, and it is coming this weekend thanks to a burly Canadian high pressure that is sliding southeastern that will position itself right over Pennsylvania this weekend. It'll cause the air to sink and compress any of the cloud development and showers for that matter. So this weekend looks gorgeous with this high pressure dominating our weather pattern. It'll keep skies clear and winds very calm. The other main story will be the humidity or lack thereof. So let's track the moisture on our humidity tracker. Starting with Friday morning, we see some of these light green colors which indicate an air mass that is slightly humid and a bit uncomfortable. But as we advance this by Saturday afternoon, notice how we start to get into some of these light blue colors, even colorless areas on this map, indicating that some very dry air is coming into Pennsylvania, and it will lead to a very comfortable Saturday afternoon. That comfortable air mass will stick around for Sunday, but once we get into Monday, notice how we start to get into some of these darker greens and oranges here, indicating dew points right around 70 degrees, so the humidity will make a comeback by the start of next week. But let's break it down with some details of your forecast this weekend. Starting with Friday, a very comfortable day ahead with a high right around 79 degrees. Some clouds could linger into southeastern Pennsylvania, but for us here in central Pennsylvania, we'll be mostly clear and will continue to clear out as we go into a chilly night ahead at 54 degrees, mostly clear skies and cool. Friday night going into Saturday, just a gorgeous day in place with a high right around 78 degrees, mostly sunny skies. Could see some puffy cumulus clouds in the afternoon hours, but all in all, a gorgeous day Saturday to move back in to Penn State. Going in to Saturday night, it'll be another clear and calm night ahead with a low chilly right around 53 degrees. It'll also still be bright out there with that full moon recently that we saw last week. Going into Sunday, just a great way to end the weekend with ample sunshine in place, a high right around 80 degrees. It is still summer, so you need to remember to put on that sunscreen if you're out and about celebrating one of the most unique county fairs here in Pennsylvania, the Grange Fair in Centre County. Tyler is up next with a feature on how his internship has been going this summer at NBC Connecticut.
I'm Tyler Jankoski here at NBC Connecticut, which is based in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm an intern here. It's my second summer with Chief Meteorologist Brad Field. Brad has been Chief Meteorologist here at NBC for more than 30 years, which makes him the longest-serving Chief Meteorologist at one station in all of New England. So I thought it would be interesting to ask him how weather forecasting and meteorology has changed over the last 3 decades.
Brad studied meteorology at a small tech school in Lowell, Massachusetts. After graduation, he held a job at a private weather company and then a small television station. Then, in March 1983, Brad became the chief meteorologist at NBC Connecticut, and ever since has seen a vast amount of change in the science of meteorology.
I was going to what was Lowell Tech when I first arrived there in 1974, and by the time I graduated in 1978 with Fred Gadomski, I might add. Thank you, Fred, for all you did for me. So I graduated, I don't know, like on a Sunday, and then on a Monday I was working at Weather Services Corporation. And I worked there for a year or two. Then I got a job in Providence for 3 years, and then I've been the chief meteorologist at NBC Connecticut ever since. You know, it's just crazy, the technological advances that have occurred. We used to get the hourlies, plot the surface maps by hand, but we would not have the computer models, such as the the NAM and the GFS, and especially the Euro. Back when I first started out, you'd make a snowstorm prediction, and then the next day the sun would rise and it'd be a completely clear day. It wouldn't even have the decency to be cloudy. So you feel your confidence level in today's meteorologist is much higher than it used to be. I'd say back then there were a lot more prayers involved.
The radar technology was very primitive, too. Detecting tornadoes was far more difficult back then as opposed to today.
We would have no ability to detect whether there was any rotation within the radar at all. All we saw would be, the only parameter you could tell on radar was the intensity of the precipitation.
And when it comes to social media, Brad has adapted well, especially considering he started working in television long before the internet and cell phones became popular.
No, seriously, it is true, Tyler. I mean, you and my own sons have taught me way more about the social media than I could have ever learned on my own. But I'll tell you what, I absolutely see the value in LinkedIn and in Twitter and in Facebook. And I think it's a wonderful way of communicating. And I, in my private time now, enjoy it. I guess the quick answer is yes, I enjoy it very much, and I think it's a good way to communicate immediately and effectively.
Surprisingly, with all the modern technology that exists nowadays, there is still more work to be done on the average shift than in decades past.
Sure, the forecasting was hard, but we had all day to work on a 6 o'clock newscast and then an 11 o'clock newscast. That was it. We had no web weather we had to do. We had no cozy TV updates we had to do. We had no Twitter and Facebook communications we had to make. We had no, 16 news breaks a day. We had none of that. So now I think the workload is much, much heavier.
Well, Brad couldn't have said it any better. From poor radar coverage and frequently inaccurate forecasts to decent radar coverage and highly accurate forecasts, meteorology and weather forecasting has really changed over the past 30 years, and it's bound to continue to make leaps and bounds over the next couple of decades. In West Hartford, Connecticut at NBC Connecticut, I'm Tyler Jankoski for Weather or Not.
Well, before we get to your extended forecast, let's recap the weather for this weekend. We'll be situated underneath a dome of high pressure that will keep things calm and clear for the entire weekend ahead. Overnight lows will be in the low to mid 50s, a few degrees cooler than what we've seen in previous nights, and your afternoon highs will climb into the upper 70s to right around 80 degrees for this weekend. It'll be a sun-filled weekend and also a noticeably less humid weekend ahead. Just all in all, a great weekend to move back to Penn State. Going into next week, however, a ridge of high pressure will be building across the center region of the United States, leaving Pennsylvania right on the edge of that ridge of high pressure. We will see some disturbances sliding through Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Each day a chance for showers. I think the greatest chance to see some thunder showers will be for us on Wednesday. We will also start to see some more humid air nudging into Pennsylvania for the start of the week. Temperatures a few degrees either side of average, which is about 79 degrees.
Thank you, Travis. In the past few weeks, we have certainly felt some chilly mornings in Happy Valley. And that begs the question of when our first frost date usually is in State College. Let's find out now in this week's Weather Whiz Quiz. The Weather Whiz Quiz this week was, what is the average date of the first frost in State College? A, October 11th to the 20th. B, October 21st to 31st. C, November 1st to November 10th, or D, October 1st to October 10th. The answer is B, October 21st to the 31st. Now, to give you some perspective, we don't even begin to see a low temperature of 59 degrees until August 28th. So if you brought out your coats or heavy sweatshirts in the morning hours for a couple of days we've had recently, you can put them away and feel good about not needing to constantly use them until we get closer to October. Now, until next time, this has been your week's episode of Whether or Not. I'm your host, Tom Bedard, and I hope you have a good day.